Great. So we are live for today, the first Radius speaker series. And today we're joined by Molly Mackinlay, who is the amazing lead of the Protocol Labs engineering, research, protocol, and product development organization, responsible for stewarding protocol design and development for the IPFS project, for the Filecoin Network, P2P, IPLD, and many other amazing novel projects that are constantly spinning out from this organization. Molly also created Protocol Labs' Launchpad program, which is a new 6-week full-time onboarding program designed to train, match, and help develop technical talent at scale for the Protocol Labs network and ecosystem, and ultimately many different ecosystems also in Web3. We're super excited to have you here, Molly. Obviously, super fortunate to be someone who has been able to work with you many times in the past, and I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into some of the origins and kind of what led you to what you're doing now and what you're really excited about in the future for Web3. So
me too. I'm pumped. It's gonna be fun.
Awesome. Yeah, so we were sort of thinking, obviously, and this is super exciting for me just because, yes, I've known you for so long, but I actually really don't know some of these things for the very early days. What was Molly like when you were a young child? And so we kind of just wanted to start a little bit with just the very beginning. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I was one of those kids who I never had a clear, this is what, I didn't really want to be like a fireman or this, that, or the other thing. But I definitely knew that I liked connecting people. I like being a part of communicating with people, speaking about things, debating stuff. I was a very vocal child. And I was also, I did Lego robotics as a small kid, and I read a lot. At least at first I was dyslexic, so I actually really struggled to read as a small kid. But when my family went and spent a year in Denmark, that was kind of a tipping point for me. Suddenly, reading became a connection to so much community and culture and magical adventure. And so I spent a lot of time reading. I spent a lot of time playing around with Legos and robots. And I spent a lot of time talking to people and debating things. And so I kind of knew those were my sweet spots of things that I liked, but I never quite knew what I was going to do all with them. And it really wasn't actually until my senior year of high school, I did a kind of program right before in the summer where I took a debate course, I took a engineering course, and I took a cognitive science course. And ironically, the intersection of all of those things led me to human computer interaction, which was a subfield within computer science. And literally the moment I learned about that field, I was light bulb, oh my gosh, this is what I need to do. It's solving problems for humans using technology. You understand the people, you understand the tech, and you make sure that we can break through all sorts of crazy barriers using that intersection. And I called home to my parents and I was oh my gosh, I found my passion. I finally know what I'm going to do. And they laughed me out of the room because ironically, both of my parents had already been in that field of computer science. And so that was I should have been paying more attention. I knew you were in computers, but I had no idea doing what. And so, yeah, seemingly I'd gone to all of the conferences in that field as a small kid, getting to play with Legos and sometimes being the guinea pig for various cognitive science learning tools that were being created at the forefront of human computer action back in the early 90s. So that was super cool. And that was kind of my journey there. I didn't really have other childhood dreams. I just wanted to do something useful.
Yes, that's so awesome. And it's very cool. This is a year before college, right? This is for your senior year, which is so cool. Yeah. I feel like you did ultimately pursue that path in college as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I went and it was perfect timing, just in time to figure that out so that I could go and change a couple of the schools that I was applying to, make sure that they had good human computer interaction programs. And so that ended up working out really well. I got very lucky with that and very much did, decide, eventually to go to Stanford. And then I got my very first quarter in college, I got to take a course with Terry Winograd, who's a luminary of the human computer interaction field, which was a 12-person like small seminar where we talked all about, the intersections of kind of like location aware applications. This is right when Foursquare was getting really popular. So like things like Foursquare and privacy preserving technology and how these things were kind of in conflict with each other, and what we were going to do about social local mobile applications that were like just becoming a big thing. So it was super cool, super fascinating. I did, that's what I studied all throughout school. It was very much a sweet spot. But then I had written into the next hill, which is like, okay, you can do anything with HCI. Like, what are you going to go do with it? Are you going to be a UX designer? You're going to be a researcher? Like, what are you going to do? And I was like, well, I want to solve problems. And so that's what led me to product management. And then kind of continuing on from there, just like, the goal of solving problems that are at that intersection of people and technology.
Yep. And I'm really curious because I know you're so passionate about education and have always been, and you've also like worked at the intersection of education and technology. I'm also really curious, where did that interest arise, and how did you think about, where technology can be applied to solve some of like the important open problems in education?
Yeah, I think I started engaging with this while I was still in school, obviously, because when you're a student, you're dealing with the educational system every single day. But it kind of came from this, I think, probably common realization. I don't think, this is like particularly insightful, but learning and knowledge is really at the root of our ability to solve problems. If we understand the problem well, we can design a solution effectively to solve the problem. And a lot of, the key problems humanity is facing, even at a macro scale, things like, disease and aging and like climate crisis and things like that. It's knowledge that is going to best equip us to go and attack those problems with like efficiency and efficacy. And so, if anything, I was like, it was one of those like, oh, well, I can't do all of those things. There are way more problems than I can solve, but those who can't do should teach, and they should, level up the knowledge of the entire community to be able to go and attack those problems with leverage at scale. And so I was like, well, if we raise the knowledge of humanity just like a couple percentage points, think about how much more we can do collectively. And so it was kind of looking at that big picture of impact that I could have as a single individual in the world, and seeing how much leverage education really had. The downside being, of course, that like sometimes there's latency in that, depending on where in the educational process you focus. You're focusing like, K through 12, which is where my work with Google Classroom was like the most focused. Like, the time to when that's like making a really big delta in the problems we're solving globally might be a longer period of time, versus if you're focused on like learning and education around like specialized knowledge within a particular problem that might be applied very quickly from when you do the learning program itself. And so, yeah, that was kind of like my first aha moment. I did a couple of different school projects around it. And then yeah, once I got into the workforce, I did the Google APM program. I knew that I wanted my like next rotation to be something related to education. And so I just like scoured all of Google to find what educational work they were doing. I met with pretty much every team that had something that was educationally focused, either internal to Google. I considered things in like the people ops domain or externally. And that's how I found Google Classroom, which at the time did not exist, was like a beta program that like I heard about through word of mouth, and like flew to New York and convinced the product manager, who was like, whose brainchild this was, Zach Yeskel, to put me on his team as like a brand new junior PM. I was like, I just need to work on this. Like, let me help out. And I like pretty much moonlighted and like did 2 jobs for about a week, proving myself that I could add value to this team, and then picked up my life and moved to New York in order to go and do that, it's not my favorite city, did not really want to live there, but loved getting to be a part of a team that was actually building something at that intersection. I did that for the next 2.5 years, building up Classroom and then building the new version of Google Forms that's used by tons of educators around the world. And so got to then work in that intersection for a while, which was really, really amazing. And I think like, there's just also such a broader community around that as well. Kind of when you think about the learning process, that was very focused on the in-school kind of like learning journey and environment of like, great, teachers and students working together in a classroom. But there's also so many other tendrils that extend beyond that. And so those are some of the other things that I've gotten to explore since then that are more kind of like in the, learning as applied within a workforce, or learning as like a general community trying to understand new concepts versus just like in the classic K through 12 school environment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and definitely want to dive into that. Is actually really cool because my nephew, who I think I maybe mentioned to you, he's 12 now. And it's so cool because I was wearing an IPFS t-shirt one day. I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you, and he was just like, wait, IPFS? Because he uses Brave. And so he knows about IPFS. And also their school uses Google Classroom. So it's kind of like, Molly's Molly's products.
They're connected to each other as well.
Yeah.
Google Classroom is the reason that I realized I wanted to work on IPFS, because
here
I was trying to build the mobile apps for Google Classroom. And we're like, oh, what can you do with phones that you can't do with the existing web platform of Classroom? Like, what new features and functionality can we offer here? It's like, oh, offline mode. This is going to be great. You as a student can like do all of your work offline, even if you're, say, on the subway or you're on a device without Wi-Fi or service, which is common for students who, don't yet have their own data plan. And I was like, oh, well, this will be amazing too, because if everyone has devices in a classroom, then we could help them collaborate and we could help them do things offline together with each other in the classroom. Nope, that's really hard to do on the traditional web. You can't have like offline collaboration between Google Docs applications right next to each other. Like, pretty much the best you get is AirDrop, and that's about it. And that's like very much like asynchronous message sending. I was like, oh, why doesn't this work? This is so frustrating. I want to shift our entire internet foundation, our fabric that we're building upon to have those capabilities. But that actually implies this like different set of primitives under the hood that then enable that sort of offline local collaboration between, say, a classroom of students and teachers who don't otherwise have like the ability to sync every single one of their database updates to some far off database in a data center that Google's running somewhere. And so that was actually my aha moment of like, I want to work on this. And that's when I joined the, IPFS project as kind of like a part-time contributor here and there, just going to meetups every now and then and contributing where I could.
Yeah, that is, that's actually really, I think, a great segue. I definitely want to return to some of the education things too, because I think it's just such a core part of like some of the new initiatives that you're working on as well. But sort of curious, I think I remember that just being such an interesting, the offline first and like local, communities, and like how IPFS could be. And I know you really spearheaded so much of that. And I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about, what that working group was doing and some of the really cool collaborations that I know were active at the time. And I don't know if, how that has changed also in the last few years as IPFS has evolved.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, when I first made the leap from, being at Google for 5 years, leaving big company world and being like, oh, I'm going to like do this whole IPFS thing full time, like, what's it going to look like? That was kind of my, starter project, was spinning up this local offline collaboration working group that started doing kind of like a speaker series of the different groups who were building tooling that, was aiming for working well in local or offline areas, did some surveying of like, what are the different exemplar applications that have done this in the past, and highlighting some of the big pain points with the technology today and things that would need to be improved in order to kind of like double down on building a lot more applications. And that kind of, it got legs of its own, right? Once you're, looking more broadly at like IPFS and the things to improve about it, ended up being a lot of the same kind of like core underlying pain points that were true outside of the local offline collaboration space. And so that kind of snowballed into doing a lot more like road mapping and planning and like problem solving and communication within the IPFS project. And then suddenly, like 6 months later, I was leading the IPFS project. And that was like a very quick, like, okay, I still am super new here and I'm still learning a ton. I've been a part of the open source community, but I've only been working on this full time for like, I don't know, 6 or 9 months. And so that was like a very quick pivot point to looking much more broadly at a set of challenges and pain points across the ecosystem, where, you know, folks like Textile were just starting to build photo sharing applications on IPFS, and Pinata had just built, like, you know, their first pinning service. And so there was all these groups that were kind of like just joining the ecosystem and getting started as well. And so that definitely caused me to like focus on some of these bigger picture use cases. And folks like Dietrich and Terry, who were part of the IPFS community, jumped in on the local offline specific part and carried that speaker series forward for a while. Now that's, you know, taken on a whole new life with all of the like Lockheed Martin collaborations for actually sending IPFS into space so that you can have local offline interplanetary collaboration, or at least you're on a different planet having that local offline experience. And so it's cool to see that like literally break boundaries and you know, be a focus for new domains. I think there's, you know, there's been a ton of work on a lot of the different like sub building blocks as well, making that a lot better, which happened kind of like over the course of just solving problems for like other domains that were trying to use IPFS as well. I'm still passionate about it. I think it's like one of those super cool use cases of IPFS, but it's also one of the more niche use cases of IPFS. There's a lot of groups who are using this for like the immutable content addressing aspect, which is, I'd say, like the more popular reason that people are like, I just need to have a content address file system. Like that's just required for my use case, versus I specifically want this to work in the few edge cases where I don't have Wi-Fi, which just for the builder population and the Web3 ecosystem is like less of the reason that people initially find IPFS.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Yeah, and actually that one of the things that I wanted to ask about as well was like, it sounds like, you know, your entry into the IPFS community was you taking a lot of initiative basically to identify something that, you know, resonated with your interests, but also just kind of, as you mentioned, so sort of going in, like figuring out where you could add value, coming up with this roadmap, aligning the people, and also, you know, actually leveraging a lot of your product management, like, you know, knowledge and skill set as well. And so I'm curious, like, if you know, maybe you could share a little bit about how you approached that, what that felt like. Yeah, was it intimidating? Like, what were the areas, you know, as you mentioned, like then, you know, now then leading IPFS and feeling like you're still new to the community, but curious, like, yeah, how did you find your initial place and kind of like just go for it?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely initially, it was like, we're making an MVP, we're starting a thing, like, let's see where it goes. And so it was just like, you know, putting in the initial legwork to get something rolling. And then the key part after that was like really seeing where there was like pull for like my time, my energy, the things that I was starting to dig into that like people got really excited about. And so in some ways that did pull me away from like the local collaboration working group in particular, because like, for example, I spent a while trying to answer the question, like, who all is using IPFS, which like hadn't really been a question that we spent a lot of time as a community trying to assess. We created places where people could say they were using IPFS, but not like the spelunking into who are all the users. And that got people really, really excited and was something I was like, oh, we need to know more about how they're using IPFS and what they need from IPFS. And so, yeah, that pulled into like these product angles that, you know, I then got to spend a lot of time on, and I think led to gaining kind of like more responsibility, more like kind of like scope to help people coordinate or help people prioritize based on that user need set. And so, yeah, it was like definitely listening to the feedback loop of where there was desire. I also had some things to unlearn, right? Like I'd come from 5 years as a product manager at Google and was like, oh, clearly, well, we should have like a multi-year roadmap for IPFS. Spent some time creating that. In retrospect, like, you know, I think it's good to have a mission statement, which came out of that, but some of the like roadmap items within that, you know, we don't use that as much from a day-to-day planning perspective anymore. And I feel like I probably could have learned more upfront from the other open source projects and best practices that there are out there versus kind of like taking my, you know, expectations from a more centralized planning process and trying to apply those to like a super open source nebulous domain, which is constantly changing on kind of like a 3 to 6 month basis. And so there were definitely like learnings within there as well, where like some things I tried didn't end up having as much impact. And it was listening, iterating and then like pushing on the things that did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess, I mean, this is maybe a little bit deviating from just, your journey, but just curious how you think about, because I think this is a really interesting question in the space as well, is just like, how do you think about, product management in general in Web3, and like, what is the role of that? Like where, as I think there are a number of people, part of some of these like product managers in Web3 or like crypto PM communities where people will write things like, oh, product is not actually that important, especially like early, right? I disagree too, but I'm curious, like, what's your take on, where is product management so important? What are some of this, like, even just, how you're describing some of the things about thinking about prioritizing, feeling like pull in certain directions, even for your own time, and how to orient communities. There's so much, obviously, it's so valuable about that way of thinking and that skill set. And I'm curious, like, what do you think are some of the elements that are most relevant for people who are product folks, maybe who are interested in getting into the space?
Yeah, at least and this probably goes back to like, childhood Molly. What does childhood Molly want to do? Like wanted to like understand the tech, understand the people, connect the two to have massive impact. I still view that as like what a product manager should do, which maybe comes from like my bias on like what I want to do as someone who considers themselves a product manager, even though I wear many other hats these days as well. Which is like, as a product manager in Web3, your job is to really understand the user space. Like, what are the needs that are actually here? Where's the demand? Like, what is the context around those needs, or the constraints on how that will influence like what you should be building to solve those needs? Like, where's the demand, and having a constant finger on the pulse of your user community, what their pain points are, and like responding to that in a hopefully proactive way, instead of just being constantly, reactively, circling to try and respond to that. And then on the flip side, being deeply involved with like your tech team, your counterparts on kind of like deep technical engineering problem solving to figure out how to solve the problem that fits the user's constraints, that fits the technical constraints of like building a cohesive system. And so to me, that's like, super critical. We have a lot of people, across Protocol Labs, where people on the tech side step up to really understand that user demand space as well. We talked about having like working group captains, where the captain like does everything. Like, they are deep tech person, and they are managing the team, and they are managing all of the users and the like collaboration interface, which definitely does get super overwhelming. It gets much more accessible when you have an engineering manager and a tech lead and a product manager, each with kind of like, one is really orienting on like the how of what you solve. The other one is really orienting on like what you should build to solve people's problems. And one is like helping coordinate and organize and manage the team to like make both of those things happen. And so definitely personally, as a product manager, I think there's still, and I still play this role of like making sure you understand the landscape of, user needs, what needs to be solved, how that fits in with all of your collaborators, of other people who are building things in the space. This is like being a good collaborator. The nice thing about Web3 is it's so open and accessible that like people are really happy of like, great, you're building the solution, I'm building this other slightly parallel or adjacent solution. How do we collaborate with each other? How do we learn from each other? How do we share the outputs of what we're doing? Like, we're doing this right now with Launchpad and Radius, and it's like phenomenal of like, great, like you're going to solve this set of problems, and I'm going to like route people to you to go and benefit from that. And I feel like the Web3 space is a place where that's like very collaborative, versus maybe some of people's experiences more in Web2, which is a more saturated space that isn't growing quite as quickly. And because of that, maybe makes people a little bit more like possessive of like problem domain, of like, no one else solved this problem, I'm solving this problem. It's like, no, please help me solve my problems. And so, yeah, that's kind of like my vantage point on PMs is like, I started this in IPFS by like just going and talking to the users a lot. We had IPFS camp, then I kind of started managing. I was the first people manager at Protocol Labs, which was super fun. We were like inventing, like, what should a people manager do? What makes a good people manager? I don't know. I've never been a people manager before, but let's go explore this. And so I think that's, again, opportunity kind of gets thrust at you, and you like jump and try and figure out how to like make the most of it, try and, synthesize it into how you can deliver impact against it. So that's kind of my view.
Yep. Yeah. And okay, so now the question, which is I'm sure going to have a long answer because you do so much, is what do you do now? How would you describe all of the various hats you wear? And also if you can share, I mean, I've also seen this firsthand, as you just mentioned, right? Like learning how to be a people manager, learning how just so many new skills and roles that you've played over the last many years. And yeah, it would just be really curious to hear a little bit of how you have approached that, this like constant like growth and learning through your career in Web3.
Yeah. It definitely hasn't always been easy. Like I've definitely like struggled with like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm still figuring this out. Like, yeah, I mean, jumping in today, I guess to answer that part of the question first, I lead an 125 person research, has ton of product, ton of infra, and problems and create breakthroughs across like IPFS, Filecoin, libp2p, all of these new building blocks for Web3 that are being built in the Protocol Labs network. And that's a lot of management, managing managers, managing brand new managers, managing brilliant technical ICs who want to be, having very strategic architecture improvements that need to be synthesized by other groups. It's still a lot connecting. It's a lot communicating with like all of the user groups and making sure that they're aware of like, the solutions that exist and vice versa. The solutions know their user groups. And so it's, lots of connecting, lots of routing, lots of keeping people focused on like, but this is the thing that really matters the most. So like roadmaps and prioritization lists and just like reiterating the mission and focus over and over. That's kind of, classic leadership of like, there's always new people coming in. Also a lot of hiring, 125-person engineering team, constantly growing. And so that's a key thing as well, hiring kind of like across the entire team. And that's like probably maybe like 80% of my time. And the other 20% is spent on the Protocol Labs talent funnel, where maybe 15% of that is on Launchpad, this new onboarding program that I created about 9 months ago. We ran our pilot in November of last year, and we are currently in our V4 cohort, indexing from 0. So it's going super well. We constantly iterate on that, and there's always a lot of like working with the existing cohort. We constantly have a piece of that cohort who have joined the Protocol Labs network and are using this Launchpad onboarding program to get matched to the right long-term role or fit within the network. And so I'm kind of their buddy and point person, helping connect them to many introductions, understand how their skill set fits with the opportunity within the space, doing some amount of like coaching and knowledge dissemination or strategization of like, this is the skill set that you have that's like really valuable. Here's a way to apply it to this domain that's maybe new to you. Here's my suggestions for how to approach some of these conversations so that you can start demonstrating value while you're still in your learning trajectory. Because that's the constant thing. You don't want to like learn. Great, now I can do stuff. Like you constantly want that feedback loop of I'm learning a thing and then I'm applying it and then I'm like learning some more by doing, and like it's a constant growth trajectory. And then I also kind of like manage a ton of leaders across the organization, and so it's a good amount of like coaching and people management. So I manage our head of recruiting and I manage kind of our people ops leaders as well. And so definitely it's a lot of full days and a lot of meetings. But it's also a lot of just talking with brilliant people and like helping align their trajectory with like, at least from my vantage point and all the other things I know, the things that I think are going to, deliver the most impact, and then they go forth and succeed, which is great. Over the years, I'd say, I've definitely, my weak spot or the thing I struggle with is like really convoluted like strategy or like blue sky thinking about like, well, what should be done? And so that's definitely where I struggle. And so I've struggled the most when it comes to like trying to set a 0 to 60 roadmap for things. And like that definitely was like I also definitely struggled as a new manager, learning face first the the sorts of challenges that you can run into, and developing a better strategy for how to like coach people, be upfront about where there aren't fits, but also constantly help people find new opportunities to apply their challenges, even if it or apply their skills to challenges, even if it's not like on my team or in the role that they're currently in. And also to like augment myself with brilliant people like Pooja who are really good at like the strategy and like solving really important product problems and deciding what problem should be solved. And so, those are other ways where like, as I ran into challenges, like being open about like where I was struggling and finding that support and help to like help me break down the problem or help me gut check my thinking so that I could learn how to do it from others. I could get other examples, which I could then like emulate, make my own, and like synthesize into my own knowledge.
No, totally. And I think you also just have extremely high standards. So you're actually, I mean, I think you're amazing at that. You're like so good at it. But yes, constantly learning. I think, yeah, I mean, I guess I've also was curious if you could share a little bit more about also the way that you thought through the Launchpad program, because I think that really was, this challenge of like 0 to 60 and like, the constant, like, the first version and like all of the examples that you learned from and kind of tying that together and then learning basically from every cohort to kind of iterate on the structure too. Curious if you could share about that.
Yeah, totally. Like the initial inspiration was Facebook Bootcamp. So that was like the initial like idea that was thrown out of like, oh, it'd be really good if like looking across all of the people that are onboarding across the PL network, we had something like that. And I also had my own experience as an APM at Google, which is totally different, but was something to lean on. And then I had all of my experience doing ed tech tools and working with teachers and students in that space, which was a lot of school visits, a lot of like interviews with teachers, a lot of just like observing and seeing what works. And so for some reason, at least it didn't feel quite as challenging to go from 0 to 1 with Launchpad because I had like all of these exemplars to pull from. And so I think there's a lot of decisions about how to design the program in the initial days that I think we got right in some really useful ways that just like happened, just kind of came naturally. One thing that I was really particular about that I've really valued about the program, I think before other people have started seeing the impact, was the value of the connection as the connection and the culture building as part of Launchpad. And I think maybe this comes from like also being a really early like engineering manager, people manager at Protocol Labs, where it's like a lot of the time when people become like either disconnected or like struggle, it's because they become siloed because they don't know what else is happening. They don't know who else to ask for help. They don't know what's happening in the network. And that starts to feel alienating. It's like, how dare they not come and tell me what they're doing? Like I feel excluded. And so to really quickly lean into building that community and that feeling of like, I am part of something and it's the shared mission and vision, and we bring it to everyone kind of like from day one, that can kind of permeate the culture with this feeling of like, I'm part of a community and we're trying to achieve something important together, which we are, and making sure everyone knows that, I think creates gravity within the network itself, which is really made up of 400 plus companies, most of whom have never worked with each other and like don't even know who else is in the network. And so to create this like feeling of we're part of something larger, I think is starting with Launchpad, which is planting a seed. Then for every new person that joins and goes through that program, they can bring it back to whatever team they're a part of. And over time, even as the network grows, we still, maintain this like connectivity and like alignment with each other, which I think is going to be more and more important many years from now. I also got to lean a lot on like having done my own learning journey in Web3. And so my MVP version of the Launchpad curriculum was just me going through all of the like images, slide decks, videos, tech talks that I had seen over the last 3.5 / even longer, because I was observing the IPFS space for a long time before. Like, what are the things that were critical to me as someone who has no background in distributed systems, no background in networking, like I come from the most human oriented part of computer science. And so I've learned everything that I know about like, content addressing and what a DHT is and all of these pieces from being a part of this ecosystem. So I was able to like reflect back the materials that are specifically here that specifically helped me gain the knowledge that I have today. Of course, that has like, now I have a team that's helping augment and build up that curriculum in more maybe like tactile ways or for more different kinds of learners than like the things that I liked when I was doing that learning experience. But that was also a piece of like, these are the components that seem to be important for the challenges to understand what we should build today. And so, yeah, our kind of like 3 pillars of Launchpad these days are making sure people get enough technical fundamentals to get, 0 to 60 within their role, whether that's a software engineer or a product manager or a community manager or someone on a recruiting team or a people ops team or something like that. So get exposed to the right depth of concepts so that they're equipped to make good decisions. They feel unblocked and like capable. And they also know where to find more information because, 6 weeks is short. We give people just enough information to like get their fingers into the deeper pieces, and then they can explore rabbit holes for the rest of their long career in the Protocol Labs network. And then, from there, we also want to build that cultural alignment. What are we doing here together? How do we get work done? Setting like shared expectations for, treating everyone with respect, but also like, what do we value? Like, why are we trying to make this movement happen? And then from there, the connections and the network and the people, both in your current Launchpad cohort. So I think our current cohort is 35 people, which is 15 more people than our previous cohort, which was like 20 people. And so growing constantly, which is super exciting. But you also want to get connected more deeply into the rest of the network. So we have mentors, we connect everyone to like the stewards of different implementations or core open source projects that they might be contributing to. We get people to practice contributing to those projects so they know like the triage process, the PR submission process, like how to test something so that it can get merged quickly. That practical knowledge that helps someone who will end up at a brand new startup in the network make core changes to IPFS that's going to unblock their team and company. And yeah, kind of with those 3 pillars, we so far have people who really love Launchpad, but are also really, really willing to give us lots of feedback so that we can keep making the next cohort better and better. And we change it all the time. So for example, our pilot was 4 weeks and it had the first week be a co-located week with the thinking of like, great, get the whole cohort together and they can all meet each other. That did not work out very well. Turns out if you do it on week 1, no one has time to prepare for that before they actually join. You have 12 people that raise their hand wanting to join like 3 days before the program actually kicks off. And then your first week, you're trying to get onto systems and you're trying to like fly somewhere to be in person. Chaos. So we moved the colo week, the co-located week, back later into the program. We extended the program and created more time for different parts of the learning curriculum. And we've made lots of changes like that ever since.
Yeah, it's so cool. The Launchpad program has such amazing rave reviews from every single person that I have talked to who's gone through it. So it's just so amazing, like a bunch of really intentional and thoughtful choices about how to design it. And as you're saying, like acting on the feedback that you're getting every time. So that is super cool. Yeah. I also wanted to, kind of obviously, as you've, been founding many of these projects, leading so many different projects and teams and people, obviously you are just such an inspiring leader to so many people as well. And I'm sort of curious, like what are some of the things that you feel like that you have learned as being like a leader in this space, as like you're also just so humble and down to earth and like super low ego person. And I just, it's just such a pleasure to work with you. And I'm just curious, like, yeah, what do you think makes a great leader? Especially, and if you think that differs between like Web 2 and Web 3, what are some of those things? But what have you really tried to hold as some of your leadership principles?
It's a great question. And I think it's different for my role where, I'm an executor or whatever. I make stuff happen is kind of like my view at kind of the point where I sit, where I'm like, working with many groups to like coordinate and make things happen, but I'm also not quite the visionary. And so I found that like, you know, that gives me, you know, a little bit more space to, my goal is like, I really want to be approachable. Whereas like, I feel like there is a thing about like, if you are the visionary person who's coming up with the whole big picture, like it is really important to have like that gravitas and that like, you know, that's someone who I will follow, who has like a big picture for how we're going to change the world. And I am like a deputy within that system who wants to know everything that's going wrong and everything that's happening such that I can help us achieve that vision and goal. But I don't need to come up with it all myself. And so I think that helps a little bit with the humility side of things, where it's like, I'm probably wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong, but like, let's go and solve this problem. The goal is to solve the problem. Super happy to like hear feedback from anyone else. I definitely do intentionally cultivate the like approachable side of things. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I just hate the idea of someone, you know, thinking I'm conceited, or someone thinking that like, you know, that I'm not open to others. So I guess like, yeah, transparency and openness is something that I take personally as a value for the Web3 space, for better or for worse. I don't know whether that's, you know, necessary, but like, for me, I love being open and sharing like all of myself. I have definitely cried in meetings. I have definitely like, you know, also gotten like overwhelmed in meeting, like bringing kind of that, you know, full self to the decisions that we're making. And yeah, I would say like definitely things that I admire a lot are skills that I'm less good at. So people that are like really organized and like, you know, succinct and put together and like really know what they want to have happen. You know, I'm a little bit more intuitive on that, where I'm like listening to many different groups and trying to synthesize and like sum up and wrap all the pieces together, which I think is actually a really important skill that I bring to many of this. But then I really love the people who are like, you know, this is the plan and this is why, or like, you know, super visionary and can just see all the pieces fitting together, or really, really knowledgeable of all the underlying pieces and how they got to be that way, which are domains of knowledge that I'm just not as deep on. And so, you know, I really admire that in leaders like Quan and leaders like Vitalik, you know, that like ability to go like super high level and then super low level, that like breadth of range, I think is really, really impressive. But then I also really admire people who create super strong community and are able to like be connectors and pull people together. I've really enjoyed getting to know like the Gitcoin community. They are just beautiful humans who I love spending time with. And they also have like this really effective way of like creating community and ecosystem engagement and collaboration really proactively. And I think that's phenomenal and so important for Web3 ecosystems. I also wish that I was as memey as Kevin Iwaki. He can just like, he just speaks in memes, and I wish I could do that. And so, you know, I have a lot of people that I look up to in this space. I would say most of my my people that I look up to in like the Web2 space, you know, were kind of like luminaries of computer science, where I was like, you know, young girl in CS growing, looking for like those mentors or those leaders. Marissa Meyer was a mentor. My mom, as a, you know, woman in computer science back in the 80s, is like, you know, a huge, you know, figure to me as someone who I look up to, who like did really, really important HCI work back in the early days of this field. And so yeah, there's a lot of amazing people and a lot of amazing mentorship out there, and all of them are like really, really willing to like collaborate, give back, give advice. And so that's something I've always found.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yep. And I guess like maybe, you know, continuing along those lines, like when you think about some of the things that you're really looking forward to about the future, and some of the directions like for your own journey, and also for the space overall, what inspires you the most?
I mean, I'm very inspired by this idea of like community ownership, community engagement, with an ecosystem. I'm not sure if I'm like, you know, that's going to be hard to achieve, to figure out like the good governance systems to make that really work. But I really do like the idea of like kind of like the worker owned cooperative, where everyone who's contributing value back to an ecosystem benefits based on the work and impact that they create within it, instead of kind of the classic like, we're Uber and we benefit off the backs of the Uber drivers, and we have the company with like all of the shareholder value, and you get paid your salary and see you later. So I really do like that that piece of the Web3 space, and I think we're only scratching the surface of like what that will create in terms of like opportunities to like align and reward contributors to communities. I'm also super excited. This maybe sounds more science fiction even these days, because I'm like now more worried about like the AGI side of things, but I am really excited for a multi-planetary human species where we're able to collaborate using tools that are like that scale to like multi-planetary communication situations. And so I'm super excited for things like IPFS and similar peer-to-peer technologies with like local caching of data to be used in those sorts of environments that like I think really highlight some of their benefits of being able to like save data locally, cache data anywhere. Anyone who has the data can serve the data back to you. Super hyper resilient, hyper useful, and with the ability to like repair data over time. If it ever like goes offline for a while, it can come back and it can start loading again. It's like, wow, that's so cool. And so those are like kind of like resilient infrastructure for the future that supports a scaling society, I think is something that's really, really cool and exciting. And then I'm also just super pumped about all of the work happening with like impact certificates and kind of like incentive mechanisms for public goods. I think all of that, we were just at Funding the Commons last weekend, and it was phenomenal and so exciting, so inspiring, so like, wow, if we can use these technologies to fund science, to fund knowledge, to fund like, global human cooperation, like, wow, we're going to be so much better off as a species if we can make that happen. And so also just super excited about the work that people are doing there to like actually start valuing these things that provide so much value to the world, but don't necessarily get represented correctly in like the capitalist worldview today. And so I'm excited for kind of that research and that whole domain of knowledge to push forward.
Yeah, I think these are all super important topics. And I think probably a lot of people will be inspired to hear that. And I think if there were a few pointers that you would share with folks to, if like they're interested in diving deeper into any of these areas that you're mentioning, are there a few resources that you that come to mind for you? You mentioned Funding the Commons as maybe a starting point on the last one, but yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I think Funding the Commons is a great thing. Fundingthecommons.io. There's a lot of video on YouTube of all of the talks and also the 2 previous virtual conferences on it. I think the work the Gitcoin community is doing with like Green Pilled, the book and the podcast is also a great like intro to the kind of like space of regenerative crypto econ or impact mechanisms or ways of valuing impactful work. So I think it's another great place to like start diving deeper. And then for the stuff that's maybe more on kind of like the I guess IPFS side of things, then I would say come get involved in the IPFS project. Like we're doing a lot of cool stuff. We're always super open to new contributors, and you could do that by joining something like Launchpad if you're coming from like somewhere else in kind of the Web2 space, trying to kind of apply your Web2 skills into Web3, or you could do that by just getting involved in open source projects, or by looking on Radius to see some of the open grants or projects that teams are looking for help with, and kind of join the community that way. So there's actually a lot of different routes to kind of helping make a resilient infrastructure, technology, interplanetary travel be able to utilize kind of like a good foundation there. You could also help like reviving the local offline working group, which I think there's still a GitHub repo, which has a ton of recordings from past speakers, and we could bring that back and have more speaker series if you have projects in this space that you want to share with the group.
Awesome. And Launchpad also, is there a website now that folks could go to if they
Yes.
want to learn more about that?
pl-launchpad.io
Awesome.
has a website, and it has a link to the application form and
Mhm.
also links to the curriculum. So if you maybe don't want to join a kind of 6-week full-time program, but want to self-learn the curriculum at your own pace, we are, open sourcing everything we're doing, and it's all, mostly links to videos and tutorials and doc sites that are all open already anyway, but it's just trying to organize and create some learning pathways through them. And so feel free to go and dive into that. And you could join Launchpad after doing the curriculum, and we'll just spend our time, building up the community culture and exciting projects in the space as well.
Awesome. Okay, great. And, we're sort of trying to do this thing. We'll see how it goes, but just, like a couple of questions that we want to ask every speaker. So the first is, do you have any books recently or that you've read recently that you would recommend? It could be anything, I guess, that you think would be interesting.
Yeah, I read Founders, which is about kind of the PayPal community, which I thought was pretty interesting. It's just always really cool to see the kind of like journey of other developers or teams that are trying to build something from 0 to 60. So I always find that awesome. I also read Ministry for the Future, which is about the climate crisis and how you apply a whole ton of different future techniques to solving and mitigating that crisis. And so I enjoyed that as well, though it would maybe encourage you to like skip around to the chapters you find interesting.
Awesome. And last question is for people who are interested in getting their start in Web3. What are some words of advice that you would share?
Don't be scared. There's like a bajillion resources out there. It can feel really overwhelming, but there are a bajillion resources out there. It's not inaccessible. It's definitely not impossible. Like, this is, there's a lot that's new, but it's also a lot that's the same or that's building on top of kind of knowledge that you already have. And so I would highly recommend, simply explained YouTube videos are just great. They really break down concepts super well. Just check out YouTube in general. Usually if you like start searching for the topics that you're confused about, there's actually a lot of really good like video content out there. If you go from kind of like basic concepts to then watching talks about different areas, find a project that you're super excited about in Web3 and look for ways that you can start contributing or participating in that ecosystem or community. The Web3 community is like super open, super happy to have new contributors. And so finding a way to like give back in small ways to that community, doing some community management, helping build a website, helping like engage in some ways, a great way to start like feeling a part of the Web3 community and having those connections that you can learn from as well. Highly recommend attending an event. Come to something like Funding the Commons, come to a meetup or a gathering of the Web3 community. There's Shelling Point, which is with the Gitcoin community. There's a ton of Filecoin events, Phil Toronto, Phil Singapore. Lisbon is going to be absolutely nuts this year. I feel like everyone's having a conference in Lisbon in like the October, November timeframe. So definitely like, yeah, there's a lot of, attend an ETH Global hackathon. That's a great way to meet a ton of people and like learn about many different projects all at once. And so yeah, like scale like some knowledge, some doing, some knowledge, some doing, some knowledge, some doing. And if you want to jump into something like PL Launchpad, like send me a note. I'm Momac28 on Twitter, or jump right into the PL Launchpad website. And we're really excited to just help people kind of bridge that gap and like, take off in this new domain. And there's so much low hanging fruit and so much opportunity for people to take advantage of. So we would love to have you.
Yay. It's awesome. Thank you so much for spending the time and sharing about your experiences and all of your wisdom and insight over, becoming, I think you are a luminary in this space. And so it's just amazing to have you share what you've learned. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sure I'm going to be one of a really, really phenomenal crew going forward who continues to build this out. So I feel honored to get to be the first.
Awesome.